Okay, good afternoon. This is Richard Hsu, host of Hsu Untied. Today, I'm really thrilled and honored to have with me as my guest Professor Bob Waldinger, who's a professor at Harvard Medical School, the author of his most recent book, The Good Life, and also a Zen priest. Bob, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
So, Bob, let me start by asking you, I know you've been studying this human development. Sometimes people call it the happiness study, but what led you to even think or decide to even start such a study?
Well, it started before I was born in 1938. It
Okay.
started with two studies that didn't even know about each other. They were both studies of what made young people thrive, but they were such different groups. One was a group of Harvard College sophomores, 19-year-old guys, very privileged group. The other was a group of boys from Boston's poorest neighborhoods and the most troubled families. It was a study at Harvard Law School of juvenile delinquency and what allowed some children who were born with so many strikes against them, what allowed those kids to still stay on good developmental paths. And then both studies were eventually brought together and the groups were studied together. And we added wives and we added children, over half of whom are women. So now we've got gender balance. But initially it was these two very different groups.
And when did you get involved in the project?
I got involved 20 years ago, 2002.
Okay. So it had already been going on for 60 something years when you got involved.
That's right. I'm the fourth director.
I see. And how did you get involved with this project? Were you doing something related? How did you get involved?
Well, George Valiant, who was my predecessor, was my teacher in medical school. He lectured to my medical school class at Harvard Med School about this study that followed the same people, followed their lives year after year. And I thought this was the most amazing thing I'd ever heard of. Never dreaming that I would one day end up being involved in it. And then over time, I got research training, and he wanted someone who was sort of in his mold. I'm a psychoanalyst. I do psychotherapy as my clinical specialty, and I have research training. That's an unusual combination. So he heard about me and took me out to lunch one day and said, "How would you like to inherit this study?" And I nearly dropped my fork and said, "Okay, yes, please."
Wow, interesting. And are you saying that up until the point, until you wrote your book, none of this had been published, or was there stuff being published on this all along?
Oh, hundreds of papers and many books. So we've been funded by NIH for decades. And as you know, when you get research funding, you need to publish in, scientific journals to show that you're finding things that are of use. So we've done that. And so, we've published hundreds of papers, 10 or 11 books. But this is the first book that's really for a general audience.
Oh, I see.
Not only with science, but also with real life stories woven in to the book.
So what did you, when you took over so you've been doing the project for about 20 years, what kinds of things did you do differently from your predecessors? How did you, what way did you kind of put your stamp on the project, if you will?
Well, my predecessors started out asking people to fill out questionnaires. They started out doing extensive physical examinations and psychological examinations of these original subjects, went to their homes and talked to their parents. But when I came on, they'd never even been audio taped, let alone videotaped. So we did audio taping, videotaping. We drew blood for DNA, which I think is so cool because in 1938, DNA wasn't even imagined. And here we were studying their genetic makeup. In addition, we put them into the MRI scanner and watch how their brains light up when we show them happy pictures and sad pictures. We bring them into our lab and we deliberately stress them out and then see how quickly they recover from stress. So all of those new methods were methods that I introduced to
Hmm.
try to get at different ways of understanding well-being and human thriving.
Hmm. What were some of the, when you went into the project, you must have a certain theses that you were trying to either prove or disprove. What were some of the theses that you were trying to, get validation for?
Well, initially, we were surprised by one of the things we found, which was that our relationships not only make us happier as we go
Mm,
through life, but good
mm,
relationships keep our bodies healthier.
hmm,
Like we didn't believe it at first, and then other studies began to find the same thing. So
hmm,
then, when I came on 20 years ago, we began to look at how that worked. Like how could the quality of our relationships make it more or less likely that we'd get heart disease or arthritis or
hmm,
type 2 diabetes? And so what I've been doing is studying the mechanisms by which that connection
hmm.
happens.
And what are those connections?
Well, a lot of it has to do with stress and stress management. So we have good reason to believe that relationships, when they're good, help us manage stress. Stress is part of daily life, right?
New.
Something stressful might happen, in the next hour, and my heart rate will go up, and
Hmm,
my circulating stress hormones will rise,
hmm,
um, and that's normal. The body is meant to go into fight or flight mode.
hmm,
But then the body is meant to calm back down again when the threat or the stress is removed. What we think is the case, we're pretty sure from good research, is that social isolation and loneliness are stressful. And that if I don't have someone to talk to about my stressful experiences,
hmm,
I can't ever get my body to calm down in quite the same way as it does when I can just interact normally with people.
hmm,
So, what we think happens is that people who don't have good relationships in their lives stay in a kind of low level flight or fight mode. So, they have higher levels of circulating cortisol, they have higher levels of inflammation, and
hmm,
that those things slowly, gradually wear away different body systems.
hmm. Well, that's pretty interesting. Now, how were you able to quantify or measure a quality of relationship? Because that must seem very hard to, quantify or qualify. How did you go about doing that?
Well, yeah, it's a really important question. So, one of the things we do is we literally ask, like, who's in your social circle? And we'll give them a set of concentric circles and we'll say, put people in these circles, like, who's your nearest and dearest?
Mm,
Put them in the
mm,
middle. And
mm,
then who's out from there? And we literally see who they list and how many people they list
hmm,
and in this diagram.
hmm,
And then we ask them about levels of closeness. So, at one point, we asked our original participant, who could you call in the middle of the night if you were sick or scared? List everybody. And most people could list several people.
hmm,
Some people couldn't list anybody. And some of those people who could not list anyone, some of those people were married. And so
hmm,
what we know is that having at least one person in the world who has your back, who will
hmm,
be there for you when you're in trouble. That's a
hmm,
really important thing you want to have.
hmm,
So we, as far as we can tell, that kind of securely attached relationship in the
hmm,
jargon of my field, that secure attachment is something everybody should have in their life somewhere.
hmm,
And then lots of other relationships have the benefit that I'm talking about of making us happier and healthier. So work relationships, friendships, family relationships, um, the even casual relationships like the barista who you talk to in the
hmm,
morning when you get your coffee, or the
hmm,
person who delivers your mail, or the cashier in the grocery store. That all of those little interactions
hmm,
can give us small hits of well-being that
hmm,
actually
hmm.
support our health.
Interesting. And this was very consistent with you, with what you had kind of thought before you entered this study? Is that, or how did it change your thinking?
I don't think I really believed it. I mean, okay, I know the mind and the body are connected, but
Yeah.
I'm a physician by training. And I believed that biology was most important and medical illnesses were were separate from mental illnesses.
Yeah, right.
I'm a psychiatrist, so I focus a lot on mental disorders. But then what we've begun to find, and lots of scientific research has found this, is that these connections between mind and body are strong. They shape both our minds and our bodies. They work in both directions, and that we're finding more and more of those connections as
Hmm.
time goes on.
Interesting. Now, does the relationship, I mean, does that apply to things, I mean, medical things like cancer, which seems very random? I know tons of very, very happy people who, get cancer, and miserable people who seem to live a long life. So
Yeah.
is there even a correlation with something, an illness like that?
No, there's a slippery slope here. The danger could be that if someone gets a serious illness, they could imagine they've brought it on themselves, or they haven't done the right things, right?
Yeah, right.
That's just not true. As you say, happy, wonderfully well-adjusted people get cancer,
Yeah,
get terrible diseases. That just
yeah,
happens.
I see.
And some of those nasty curmudgeons live long lives.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
um,
Poorest even. Yes, totally.
yeah. But but what we do know is that stress does affect how we manage illness and how we weather illness. So I'll give you an example. There was a really powerful study of people who are caring for demented relatives. That's one of the most stressful things you can do,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And they compared a group of caregivers for demented relatives with people of similar age and health who were not caregivers. And they did little skin biopsies. They make a little punch, they punch out a little bit of skin. And then what they did was they simply looked at how quickly those little wounds healed.
Hmm.
The people who were taking care of demented relatives took many days longer to heal those small wounds than
Wow.
the people who weren't. And so
Huh.
we know that um, that our level of stress really matters in terms of how our bodies mend, how they take care
Hmm.
of themselves.
Hmm.
So bottom line is, serious illnesses happen through nobody's fault very often, but that sometimes we can do things to make the course of illness go more easily.
Hmm. Hmm. What about, I mean, it seems like there's sort of two sides of this. There's the quality of the relationship, and then of course there's the quality of stress. Can you achieve the same thing by lowering stress? I mean, I'm sure it'd be great to improve both ends, but you see what I'm saying? Like, in other words, can
Yeah,
you, does,
yeah,
what is your,
yeah. Well, there have been a lot of studies of meditation and the benefits of meditation, and we
yeah,
know that meditation often lowers stress. And it also has these health benefits that we think are associated with lowering stress.
yeah.
So I think you're onto something, that it's possible by lowering your levels of stress through various things,
Hmm.
meditation, yoga, various hobbies that calm you down.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
All of those things can have health benefits. Diet can have, as you know, can have tremendous health benefits as well.
Right, right. So tell me, let's unpack the relationships a little bit more. Obviously everyone's, usually got a spouse in their life, or certainly family members. Is there certain kinds of relationships that, is it the number of relationships? Is it the quality? Or is it, what kind of quality relationships, do you have a little more,
Sure.
nuanced understanding on
Good.
that?
Yeah, really important question. And so, first of all, 1 in 3 people on the planet will say that they are often lonely,
Yeah.
meaning not as connected to others as they want to be. So even if you're in a marriage, even if you have crowds of people around you all day long, you can be lonely.
Yes.
So that's something just to name, because it isn't always apparent that someone is lonely because they look like they're surrounded with people. They must be fine, right?
Yeah, right.
But then, I'm sorry, now I just lost track. So your question was about
Uh,
what kind
about
of relationships, right?
yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Okay. So, and people often ask, is there a number of relationships
yeah,
that's optimal, that's ideal? And the answer is no. That we're all very different. We all have different temperaments. Some of us are shy, introverted. Some of us are quite extroverted. Introverts don't need many people in their lives. And in fact, for an introvert, being around a lot of people can be incredibly stressful.
yes, right.
Whereas extroverts need a lot of people. They get energy from
Yeah.
other people. So it's a highly individual matter. Like, you
Mm.
probably can check in with yourself and say, do I have the right number of people in my life? And you can
Mm.
probably come up with a good
Mm.
answer, but it's
Mm.
for you, right?
Mm.
It wouldn't
Mm.
be for me.
Mm.
Spouses often complain, oh, my spouse never wants to go out, never wants to be with people, and I want to be with people all the time. Those
Right.
are real differences. Not abnormal. It's not abnormal to be shy or extroverted,
Mm.
or anywhere in between.
Mm.
So, so what that means is that it's highly individual how many people you want and need in your life. But also, then there is that element that I spoke about, that secure attachment, where you want to have at least one person
Mm.
you feel like would be there for you in an emergency,
Mm.
no matter what.
Now, isn't that for most people usually the spouse if they're married? I mean, isn't that almost always the case typically?
Not almost always, often the case, but sometimes, spouses, uh, they're not there for each other in the same way. Sometimes
Mm.
it might be a friend or a sibling, or even a child.
Yeah,
At
yeah,
times, often a grown child.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it varies a lot, but yes, spouse is one of the reasons why we do get into intimate partnerships, is often for that element of security and safety.
Mm-hmm. Now, what about in your relationships? Have you looked at anything that relates, a friend versus a family relative versus maybe a spouse? Like, how does that, affect one's well-being?
We haven't seen differences. So what that means is you don't need to have a spouse to get these benefits, for
Mm,
example.
mm, mm,
It doesn't have to be a blood relative.
mm,
Be a
mm,
friend.
mm,
Uh, and so what matters more is the quality of the relationship rather than how that person is connected with you.
yeah, yeah. What are some of the when you say quality of the relationship, what what are the things that make up a high quality relationship that
Yeah,
make it valuable?
yeah. Well, we ask people this, and one of the things they say is, I want to be able to be myself with this person, right? I
Mm,
don't want to have to hide really important aspects of who I am.
mm, mm,
And of course, we don't bare our soul with everybody. We're different in different relationships. But ideally, we can just be who we are without having to stifle ourselves
mm, mm,
all the time. And so
mm,
that feels really important.
mm,
Uh, the other thing I think most people would like in a good relationship is some kind of mutuality. I
mm,
want you to be as into me as I am into you, right? And I want you to bring as much to our relationship as I
mm,
bring.
mm,
Um, I don't want to be the only one who asks you to go out for dinners. I want you to
yeah,
ask once in a while, right?
mm,
Um, it's that kind of reciprocation that people value a lot,
mm,
rather than relationships where it's all one way.
yeah, interesting. Does does it also turn out that we also need a variety of relationships? Like we want some that are close, but then we also ones that are just casual. And is that not the case? What did you discover?
Super important. That is super important. Um, that if you think about it, we get different things from different relationships. I have some relationships that are just for fun. We just do stuff together and have a good time. We
Mhm,
may not talk about personal stuff much at all. I have
mhm,
other relationships where I talk primarily about my personal life and share things that I wouldn't share with most people.
Mm-hmm.
I have a really good relationship with my neighbor, and he has the best toolkit I've ever seen. So when I'm trying to fix something in my house, I always have the wrong tool. He will always bring me what I need, right? He's not my nearest and dearest, but he's my buddy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we get different things from different
Mm-hmm.
kinds of
Mm-hmm.
relationships, and that's normal.
What have you also discovered along those same lines? What have you discovered about the quantity of time you spend with one in one's relationships? Because, that really varies too. I mean, you might have a very close friend that you see once a year, and you might have somebody that you see every day, but you're not particularly close to. How does the quantity affect health and well-being?
Well, quantity does matter. I mean, I think we've all had that experience of long-standing friendships where we don't see each other very often, but when we do, it's like no time has passed, and
Yes.
but time time spent really does matter. Of course, it matters most with family, with children, with spouses.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you can't be traveling, 6 days a week and have an easy relationship with your family. That's hard,
Yeah.
right? So FaceTime matters.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but there are relationships that can be sustained by infrequent contact.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it really depends on the relationship. Um, I have a friend who is my oldest friend from kindergarten. I don't see him that often. I don't
Yeah.
talk to him that often, but when we do, we're right back into it, and we're often sharing memories of things that happened in the third grade. Um, and that's a unique relationship for me.
Yeah.
He's not one of the people with whom I'm the most up to date about my day-to-day life because I don't
Yeah.
see him that often.
Yeah. So one term that I recently read was, have you heard this term textlationship?
Oh, I think I know what you mean. I hadn't heard it before. Tell
Yeah,
me
so
about what
it
it.
was it's a slang term, but I think you get the idea. Basically, it's these relationships that are now being formed almost exclusively on text, and it could be apparently a romantic relationship, could be a friendship. So I was curious, have you studied anything about that?
We have not in our research, but I can tell you in my clinical work, I've seen this. So actually, I do talk therapy, and I'm doing it right now with a young man in his early 20s, and he's telling me about his dating life where he's just starting to date somebody, and she doesn't answer his text for 3 days, and he's decided that it's completely over
Huh.
because she didn't answer his text for 3 days. And he's built up this whole story about she doesn't like him. And then she gets back to him and say, "Oh, my phone was broken," you know. And so I think one of the things that I've been impressed by is that electronic communications leave a lot of room for miscommunication.
Mm,
Like a lot of things can go wrong.
yeah,
I don't know if you've ever seen this, but I've seen that emails can go really wrong.
yeah,
Like
for
if
sure.
someone misreads an email and thinks
Totally.
you're being nasty when you don't mean to be nasty,
Yeah, yeah.
because emails and texts often filter out emotion. That's why, like we often put emojis
Yeah,
into
yeah,
texts and emails because we're trying to convey emotion,
yeah.
but there's so much room for faulty communication that I think we need to be careful about. What, text relationships? Is that what they're
Yeah,
called?
yeah,
I think we
yeah,
need
yeah.
to be careful about taking it into the real world soon.
Well, I'm curious because, as more and more of people's relationships are becoming more text relationships, how does that affect the relationships? I mean, I know friends that I used to talk to all the time, and now we kind of just text all the time, and even, and so it's already, relationships. Anyway, so I was just curious about how that is
Yeah.
going to affect the quality of relationships.
Well, but I think that if you're texting on a bedrock of an established relationship,
Yeah.
where these are your friends and you've had a lot of in real life, experience with them, then to text back and forth can be an easy way to exchange information, right?
Yes.
That's different from starting from scratch.
Yeah, that's probably true.
I'm just getting to know you.
Yes.
That's different.
Yeah, that probably makes sense. Now, tell me what was the reason for you writing this book, The Good Life? Let's
Uh,
talk about that.
Well, it started when I gave a TED Talk. I gave a TED Talk in 2015, and it was at a little elementary school auditorium
Huh.
near my house,
Uh-huh.
and for a local TEDx event. And I thought it was just going to get some views on our local YouTube channel. And
Right.
then it went viral. It's now one of the 10 most watched TED Talks in the history of TED.
Wow.
And it's about this. It's about what research tells us about how relationships matter in our lives.
Huh.
And, as somebody said to me once, that TED Talk didn't go viral because you're so good looking. It went viral because there's something about that message that's important.
Yeah.
And so what I began to see was that people were hungry for knowing more. Okay, what does science actually tell us about how relationships matter in our lives? I mean, all the questions, you're asking exactly the questions that people ask and that there are some answers to. And so that's why I decided to write the book with my colleague, Mark Schultz, who I've done research with for 25 years. And so we just said, let's put this into a really accessible form. We've published all this in journals, but they're academic journals that nobody reads. I mean, these
Yeah, right.
papers would put you to sleep. They're highly technical. So we wanted to write a book with real life stories, and a book that would carry you along and be fun to read. And we're hoping that's what we've written.
Well, the thing that's kind of interesting about this whole thing is that I like the fact that I like the fact that it's simplistic and complex at the same time. In other words, on one hand, you're offering one of the simplest things in life, and yet it's deeply, deeply complex. I mean, relationships. I mean, my goodness. I mean, how can you even put your arms around it?
Exactly, exactly. And I think it's one of the reasons why, on the one hand, we know relationships are important, but we kind of keep it on the back burner because
Um,
they are complicated. They're messy, right?
yeah, right.
Even just reaching out to my friend, like, well, what if she's in a bad mood today? What if she doesn't want to hear from me? So even someone I know, let alone striking up a new relationship with someone I don't know. So there's always a little bit of risk in relationships that's different from just staying home and watching something on Netflix tonight instead of going to that party, right? Where I don't know people and might meet somebody new.
Yeah.
So what we find is that all of us know that relationships are important, but we also know that they're complicated, and we're always trying to figure out how best to navigate them.
Were there any other factors that you found really affected mental well-being other than relationships? I mean, what
Yes.
were some of the other things that you discovered?
Yes. Taking care of your health really, really matters.
Hmm.
So, not a surprise, but our study found that taking care of your health added years to your life.
Hmm.
So, we're talking eating well, not becoming obese, getting regular exercise,
Hmm.
getting preventive health care, going for those checkups,
Hmm.
not smoking, not abusing drugs or alcohol.
Hmm.
All of those things matter enormously for
Hmm.
how happy we are, for how we feel emotionally, and certainly for how we are physically and how long we live.
Hmm.
And, we are just one of countless studies now that find this. So that if you're going to make an investment, I would say make two investments: invest in your relationships and invest in your health.
Yeah,
One of our one of our one of our participants said, when he was really old, he said, "My advice is take care of your body like you're going to need it for 100 years."
interesting. Now let's talk a little bit about you. You said you're a Zen priest. Tell me a
Yeah.
little bit about how that overlays into your work and the importance of that in your life.
Well, it's a wonderful addition to my life. I've been practicing Zen for almost 20 years, and I meditate every day.
Hmm.
And now I teach Zen. I teach online. I have a Zen group, and I teach retreats in person. Um, and Zen for me is another way of understanding what it means to be a human being and to be alive. Just
Hmm.
like my research is a way of understanding that and
Hmm.
following thousands of lives over decades.
Mm.
Similarly, my clinical work, doing talk therapy with people, where I get to really the privilege of taking deep dives into people's life experience. And then Zen is really about, sitting on a cushion every day, meditating, watching my mind and my body, watching what
Mm.
comes up moment
Mm.
after moment.
Mm. Mm.
And I have learned so much from my Zen practice that I wouldn't learn in any other way. I
Mm.
mean, it sounds so simple, but it's like learning what it's like to breathe. It's
Mm.
learning what it's like to sit absolutely still and not
Mm.
move
Mm.
when your nose itches like crazy and you
Mm.
think you can't stand it if you don't scratch,
Mm.
right? It's like it's stopping and looking at a tree for 5 full minutes and noticing everything I'd never seen before about the tree in my front yard. I mean, it's so many different ways of learning about life. That's Zen for me.
It's interesting. I one of the things that who Joseph Goldstein is, who's a
Oh
very
yeah.
one of the things he says that when he first discovered how amazing, his mind was, or how fascinating it was, he wanted to like invite all his friends to share it with them. This is a joke, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yes. He said, in fact, I heard him give a talk once and he said he invited his friends over to watch him meditate. Can you imagine? It's like watching grass grow.
Yeah,
Like, no.
exactly. But tell me how meditation, I mean, the importance of relationships in meditation. Tell me what the intersection of those two are.
Well, meditation, um, first of all, gets me really familiar with the messiness of my heart and mind,
Mm.
right? So all these emotions come up that lots of joy and wonder and happiness, and then some emotions I'm not very proud of, like
Mm.
envy and anger and all that. And what happens is that as I get more accepting of all the messiness of my feelings, I have a lot more understanding of what other people are dealing with too, because everybody's dealing with this stuff.
Mm.
And so what happens is that naturally, from meditating, you come to have more compassion for other people because you realize, oh my gosh,
Mm.
everybody else is struggling with the same
Mm.
crap that
Mm.
comes up for me when I
Mm.
sit and watch my mind. And
Mm.
that's helpful because then when I get an angry email from somebody or somebody cuts me off in traffic, I can pretty quickly go to, oh, I wonder if they're having a bad day.
Mm.
I wonder if somebody just gave them bad news.
Mm.
Whereas I didn't used to be able to do that. But
Mm.
I think that because meditation naturally uh, nourishes and cultivates compassion, not a kind of fake compassion like, oh,
Mm.
there, not at all. It's like it comes up in the most natural way, like, oh my gosh, I struggle with this, and everybody I know struggles with it
Mm.
too. That's a real help
Mm.
in dealing with other people.
Has the study that you did, how has that affected have you tried to do things differently in your own relationships, try to cultivate? Tell me a little bit about how that has affected you
Yeah,
personally, what you've tried to do in your relationships.
I have. So I'm a Harvard professor, which means I could work 24/7 until I'm dead. I
Yeah.
mean, that's what Harvard professors do. I mean, you don't get to be a Harvard professor unless you've jumped through so many hoops, right? And I began to realize, starting when I had kids, but I began to realize that I could just work my life away and my life would be gone. And then when I began to understand from my research how important relationships were, I began to see that I could make choices every day, every week about whether to spend my free time doing more work
Mm.
or spend my free time seeing people who I wanted to make sure I
Mm.
stayed connected to.
Mm.
So tomorrow night, I'm going out with one of my friends. We're going to go have dinner. And this weekend, I have 2 walks planned with friends who I don't
Mm.
get to see that often. And
Mm.
this is different for me than what I was doing 20 years ago when I was working really hard
Mm.
to get promoted academically and, make my way. It's really helped me to
Mm.
I'm trying to take my own medicine in terms of the research. I'm trying to follow my own advice.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So how much longer are you going to continue to run this thing? Are you 20 years is a long time? Are you going to hand it over to someone soon, or you're still doing it? What is your plan with this?
Oh, you're asking the question I ask myself, and yeah. I think we are heading toward um, a point where we make the study available to the public in a confidential form. So we make data available in what's called de-identified form. So you can't figure out who the real people are,
Yep.
but you can use the data to ask new questions. So we're going to do that. And I think probably we're going to do more and more collaboration with other research groups, but we're probably not going to reach out to yet another generation in the study. We're probably going to stop here because the third generation, as the generations go, they spread out. Because think about, I might have my kids when I'm in my early 20s. You might have your kids when you're in your 50s.
Right.
And so the generations really spread out. Our third generation has people in it we're pretty sure aren't born yet, and has a few people in it who are already in their 50s. So how do we even call that a generation?
Yeah, right.
And so I think what we're going to do now is decide, okay, we're going to let other research studies carry the ball forward down the field. But we're going to collaborate like crazy. I mean, we're already collaborating with lots of other research groups, and we're inviting people to come use our data because other people will ask questions using our data that we didn't even think to ask. And so it's wonderful to have new minds, approach the information we've gathered.
Now, since you started this study, or since the study was started, you said 1938. Obviously, that was before computers. Give me a sense of the volume of paper that is. Is this a 10 by 10 room? Give me a feeling for how much paper there is for the study.
Okay. It's about a 10 by 20 room. It's 25 5-drawer file cabinets. And so that means 125 file drawers. Each one is really long, and each one is jam-packed full of paper in files. So I could look at one family's life over 3 generations, and it's usually this thick, and you can literally leaf through the life of a family. And it's such a privilege to be able to do that. So one of the things we did was we got a grant to scan every one of those pieces of paper.
Yeah, okay.
Into searchable PDFs. Okay. So now all those, hundreds of thousands of pieces of paper fit on a thumb drive.
Oh, wow. Oh, so it has all been digitized.
All been digitized. And so now we are archiving the pieces of paper at a Harvard archive. It's called the Institute for Quantitative Social Sciences, so that people will be able to go back to the original documents if they want to. But now we can share those documents with them digitally.
Yeah, interesting. What are your other personal interests that you want to, for your research? I realize you might not do this project, you're going to do other kind of collaborations. What are some of the themes you would still like to study and learn in terms of going forward?
Yeah. Well, one of the things we're already starting to study is the digital revolution and how it's impacting people's relationships and their experiences of themselves. So we're collecting data right now from our second generation, and they're all baby boomers on average. We're asking them, how do you use social media? How much time do you spend? Which platforms are you on? How does it affect your sense of yourself, your mood? And so I'm really interested in that because the digital revolution, as we know, is a profound change in how we live our lives. So how is it affecting our relationships? How is it affecting our mood, our self-esteem, all that? So I'm really interested in that.
And do you have any theses on that? What does your intuitive sense say about how digital media and social media and all that is affecting our relationships?
Well, there is actually some research. It's not from our group, but that points the way.
Uh-huh.
And it says that how we use social media makes a big difference in whether our well-being goes up or down. That
Huh.
if we use social media actively to connect with other people, our well-being usually goes up.
Huh.
And if we use social media passively, like to scroll through somebody else's Instagram feed, our well-being often goes down.
Oh,
That
interesting.
that when we connect with other people actively, we get happier. When we scroll through somebody else's curated life, you
Yeah.
know, I don't post my miserable pictures when I wake up in the morning feeling like
Right.
I don't know where my life is going. I post my
Right.
happy pictures, right?
Huh.
And so when we look at other people's pictures, we can imagine everybody else is having these perfect lives,
Yeah.
and I'm the only one who's having all these ups and downs.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so when we scroll through other people's lives, our well-being goes down. We get more depressed. We compare ourselves to other
Yeah.
people negatively. So that's where I think some of the research is starting to point us.
That part makes sense to me because I get that feeling too when I look at these other posts.
Yeah.
But what about posting? Why does posting your own things? How does that elevate your well-being? I mean, that just
Well,
seems more like I don't know, like
it makes you feel like you matter, right? I think we all want to feel like we matter. We really do. We want to feel seen by others and like we make a difference. And so, getting likes on social media is so powerful.
yes,
People are
that's
saying, I like what you chose. I like what you posted. I like your cat video, you know, and 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 it really, I think it gives us this little hint of affirmation. And who doesn't want that?
yes, yes,
Um, it's just that it's not in real life.
yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Anyways, interesting. Well, Bob, it's been a super interesting conversation. This study. I mean, you must feel so fortunate to have stumbled onto this project.
Totally, exactly. Fortunate, lucky, lucky, lucky.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And
It was,
it also sounds like it's been a really good fit for you. You have such a personal interest in this topic.
yeah.
So it was just such a good fit for you, it seems like.
Yeah, I think it was. I think it was. That I've always been fascinated by people's life experience. And
Yeah,
so this
right.
was like the ideal way to get to exercise that fascination.
Yeah, yeah. Bob, thank you so much for taking this time. When you come up with your next research or write your next book, please, please come back and tell me about it.
I will. This was a pleasure. What a lovely conversation.
Thanks so much. This is Richard
Okay.
Hsu and Bob Waldinger. Thanks.